Live from the Business RadioX studios in Atlanta, it's time for the Exit Exchange, brought to you by XPX Atlanta, dedicated to changing the trajectory of exit planning services in the Southeast. Now, here's your host.
And hello again, everyone. Welcome to the Exit Exchange. We are delighted to have you with us, and this is going to be a good one, folks. We have got Michael Rosenthal with us, and Michael is a long-term member, founding member of XPX Atlanta, and he has a lot of insights around franchisees, franchisors, exiting those businesses, buying those franchises, and I think this show's going to be a good one. We've been looking forward to this conversation, but before we get to Michael, I just want to remind you that XPX Atlanta, the chapter of XPX Atlanta, is a community of trusted advisors that collaborate to help their private company clients build business value, transfer ownership, and create a legacy of success in their lives and their communities. If you want to know more, go to xpxatlanta.org to find out where to plug in. If not just to join, just to participate, because I think you'll find a lot out of XPX Atlanta. Now, again, I want to turn to Michael Rosenthal. Michael is with the Clark Hill Law Firm.
Yes, sir.
Michael, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for being back. You're a return guest, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Well, again, appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. For those that don't know you, let's talk a little bit about you and your expertise. How you serving folks out there?
I am primarily in what's called franchise and distribution law. The vast majority is franchise. I represent franchisors, the organizations that found and manage franchise systems and sell franchises to franchisees. And then I also represent franchisees, the individuals and companies that own franchises. They own the units. And we cover the gamut of their needs. So I sometimes describe my practice as more industry specific than functional, if that makes any sense. We certainly do the regulatory work that comes with representing franchisors. It's a heavily regulated industry, but we handle their day-to-day needs and things like dealing with problem franchisees, defaults, which do occur. We handle their mergers and acquisitions. And then on the franchisee side, we help people assess whether to buy a franchise, reviewing the franchise documents with them, giving them advice and guidance. And then for our franchisee clients, generally they're small business owners, and we handle their day-to-day representations. Typically, it might be something as simple as a lease, setting up an LLC. It might be representing their employment law needs, which I would refer to another lawyer in my firm. Mm-hmm. It's just the day-to-day representation. And then a growing trend in the franchise industry is to have larger multi-unit franchisees. So you'll see franchisees that own sometimes dozens or hundreds of units in a particular system, or hundreds of units in multiple systems, which are very large companies. These are billion-dollar companies.
Mm. Before we get into some of the details, I would imagine that you having the perspective in terms of the clients you've represented of both the franchisor, you've represented franchisors, you've represented a lot of franchisees over time. That really helps you work from whatever perspective that client is. In other words, if you've got a prospective franchisee, you can help them understand where a franchisor is coming from because you've worked with a lot of them, right? And vice versa.
Absolutely. I think on the franchisor side, it helps me prepare better documents, better understand what an individual business owner might be going through, and advise my franchisor client on how to get to a good outcome. Mm-hmm. On the franchisee side, I think I can better help them figure out what is negotiable, if anything. And I think have a better sense of warning signs if there's a problem with the system than they might be able to have on their own.
Because you've seen a boatload of FDDs, right? That's the terminology, franchise disclosure document. And so that's an industry standard thing.
It's required by federal law, 4 or 5 dozen of them a year.
Mm.
So I think I'm approaching, I've never kept track, but I'm going to guess I'm somewhere in the 1,000 or so range that I've looked
Oh my gosh. And Michael's still got a great personality in spite of all that.
I drink a lot of coffee. I think I can get a better sense sometimes of things. And sometimes it's not that a franchisor, it's that they're inexperienced. And I can at least say to the client, from looking at this document, I can see that you're hitching the wagon to somebody that's new to this, and there's some more risk associated with that.
Let's talk around the 40,000 foot level and then dive a little bit. What are the big trends that you're seeing in the franchise world that both franchisors that are trying to build their networks, build their systems, and franchisees that are looking into buying potentially buying a franchise? What do they need to be paying attention to?
The big trends are, there's probably 3 of them: private equity and private equity.
Ah, okay. That makes it simple.
Private equity is essentially taken over the industry over the last 15 or 20 years. Mm-hmm. You still have a few big public company franchisors like the McDonald's of the world. Mm-hmm. But the very, very strong trend I'm seeing is private equity firms want to buy into sectors. So it might be a restaurant, it might be home repair, it might be health and wellness or exercise, and they're going to own multiple brands within that industry because in theory, they feel like that allows them to be knowledgeable in that industry and to better support their franchisees, do a better job. And usually that is the case. Mm-hmm. But it also means that as a franchisee, you're going to be dealing with a different dynamic than if you bought a franchise from the founder of the company. So the guy that started the first barbecue joint, Bubba's Barbecue, and he opened 4 more Bubba's, and he's got 5, and he decides to franchise, and that's going to have a different feel to it than dealing with the private equity firm, which is frequently a more professional organization. They usually have more resources, and their motivations can be a little bit different. Everybody is motivated to make money, but the question is how fast and how hard.
And we're not putting any value judgments on any of that. That Bubba can be a great person one way or the other. They can also be a bad place to put money, and the same thing with PE firms.
Absolutely. I'm helping 2 franchisees here in Atlanta right now, former franchisees, I should say, deal with having had to close down their units. And it's a small system. It's not private equity owned. And for a number of reasons, and probably a bunch of reasons I don't understand because I haven't gotten into the weeds on the business model, it just hasn't worked very well. Mm-hmm. And not just for my clients, but other franchisees and even some company stores. So that's a private owner that presumably was well-intended, but it didn't work for some reason.
So I guess the question is, from a franchisee point of view, you get back to, what do I need to look at, right? When I'm thinking about buying that franchise to begin with, and then let's talk about the issue of starting one from scratch versus buying an existing franchise. So let's talk about all of that and just what franchisees need to be paying attention to.
So I'll start with, and I love drawing analogies. You're buying a franchise. It's actually not unlike getting married, right? It's a serious proposition. Maybe for some people, they don't take it that seriously. I'm in Las Vegas and I'm really drunk. Wow, she's awfully attractive. I'm going to marry her. That's really stupid, right? And it's the same thing.
In most cases, yes.
You might get lucky.
Right.
But she might be your lifelong, who knows? But it's the same thing, right? You want to get to know somebody. Mm-hmm. You want to have some time to spend. Years ago, I had a friend that met someone. She met a man and she married him 6 weeks later. They lived together as husband and wife for 6 weeks. She decided it was a terrible mistake, filed a divorce and it took 6 weeks. And I said, 666 is not a good thing. Right? But with franchising, you've got to realize you're investing your time and your money. And for a lot of my franchisee clients, it's their life savings or a substantial portion of it. And you really want to do your homework and not get under the spell. Mm-hmm. We're back to going to Las Vegas. I've had too much to drink. And wow, she was awfully attractive, right? And you really want to get to know the people. So I think that's the strongest advice I would give to my franchisee clients is really think about, you can never do enough due diligence, right? At some point you have to make a decision, but this is a big decision. And if you do it right and you get lucky, you get to be married for 44 years like I am. Mm-hmm. There's an element of both, right?
Yeah.
And you're looking at all the things. So it's not a reason I married my wife, but my wife's parents were married until my father-in-law passed away. My parents were married until the day my mom died. And that's actually a pretty good indicator of the type of person you might be marrying, is whether or not their parents remained married. Right? It's just background, but it's the same thing in franchising. Is you want to talk to as many franchisees as possible, not just the ones that the franchisor said you should speak with. There's a list in the back of the FDD of every franchisee. Not all of them will talk to you because they've got other things to do with their day.
Sure.
But a lot of them will, if you're respectful of their time.
Yeah.
And I can give you a handful of questions to ask them that hopefully will give you some better insight. So you really want to do your homework. And again, at some point you have to stop and say, am I going to do this or not? But you can almost never do too much due diligence, right? It's one of those things. You are buying a business, whether you're starting it or you're buying, and we'll talk about that, an existing franchise. You are buying a business, you're investing your money. You really need to be serious about this. It's not, at least to me, if you're going to put several $100,000 to beyond $1 million into something, this isn't gambling, right? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, hey, I went to the casino, we're back to Las Vegas again. And I just decided to put the $500,000 I took out of my 401k on the crap table and see if I can make it $3 million. That's not a good way to approach things. And typically franchisees, often they don't know a lot about the industry that they're going into. And one of the advantages of franchising is a good franchisor is going to help you learn what you need to know about that industry and that business model. But you also have to recognize, as a franchisee, you're likely to be very dependent on them in understanding that industry. And so if they do a great job training you, great. But if they don't, you're going to be wandering in the wilderness, right?
Yeah. And one thing that we have to say is that most franchisors, the way they make their money is a royalty based on sales, right?
That's the way it should work, yes.
Okay.
And it does work that way most of the time.
Okay. I guess the point of it is that this is true for the good ones, the ethical ones, the ones that are fantastic, that you want to be part of that family. And it's true for the really bad ones and the unethical ones, is they get paid based on the top line, not on your bottom line.
That is true. There are a small minority of franchisors that I think, while they want to get to the point where they're making their money from royalties, they're really making their money selling franchises, from the initial franchise fees, sometimes from mandatory equipment or other items you have to purchase from them that are marked up. But definitely in the long run, a profitable franchisor is going to be profitable because your revenues at the top line level are high. And again, in theory, they should be motivated for you to be profitable so you'll remain in business and you'll say good things to your buddies and family members, and they'll want to buy a franchise. But there is a little bit of an issue, which is the franchisor is going to get paid no matter what out of the royalties. And again, I've been representing a couple of folks that bought into a system that has not done well, and they were restaurants. I was shocked at how high their revenues were, and they're still losing money. But from the franchisor's perspective, they may not care that much. My clients were paying maybe $60,000 a year in royalties on $1 million of revenue. Most quick service restaurants that are doing $1 million that are not standalone like a Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, but are in line, are doing well.
Yeah.
These were not. The food costs and other costs didn't match up. But from the franchisor's perspective, whether you make money or not, they get their royalty.
Yeah. And again, that's not casting a value judgment. It's just saying that you need to understand the economics of the business here. If you're a franchisee, I want to test a theory on you. See, most people want to be positive, right? In general.
Absolutely.
They don't want to be negative.
They wouldn't be buying a business in Ellie's.
And they want to believe the best. And that's one reason why they're reluctant to do the due diligence they ought to do in terms of asking questions, because they think it's a negative. Whereas if they looked at it like, hey, once I get into this business, I need to know as much as I possibly can ahead of time, so it saves me money later. I don't make the mistakes that others made, and I learn from that ahead of time. If they looked at it that way, they might actually do a lot more due diligence, and then potentially, if they, in those cases when they find something they need to avoid, they'd be more likely to do that.
Absolutely. And I think what you've described is just a desire to be a lifelong learner.
Yeah, right.
and I always loved the Ronald Reagan quote. He was talking about the Soviets, trust but verify. And it's the same thing, right? You could be positive and say, this looks like a great opportunity, but you're foolish if you don't verify, because you're risking your hard-earned dollars. And again, so often what I see is it's a substantial portion of someone's savings that they're investing. And there's an opportunity cost that goes beyond that a lot of people forget, which is if I'm standing upright and have an IQ above 90, I can do some job, right?
Right.
And a willingness to work. I often say to my clients, you're going to start this business. If you're making zero, you're losing the opportunity cost to work somewhere else. And I deal with a lot of people that were business executives or middle management. So they're thinking well into the six figures as their opportunity cost. And I'd like to bring it down a little bit and say, John, if you woke up tomorrow and you needed a job and your industry was suffering for some reason, you could get a job at the Home Depot. Not to pick on the Home Depot.
Yeah.
You could get a job at the Home Depot and they'll pay you some amount of money. They'll give you good benefits, including stock options.
Yeah.
And what you're losing is the opportunity cost to work at the Home Depot or some other place, which may not seem like a great opportunity to you at the moment, but it's a better opportunity than zero.
Yeah. Yeah. Michael Rosenthal is with us, folks. He's with the Clark Hill Law Firm. He's an expert, an authority in franchise systems, works with both franchisors and franchisees. One of the things that we talk a lot about at XPX is understanding the end as you start, right? That a lot of the most successful exits are the ones where business owners are thinking about the exit at the time they're buying the business or starting the business. So let's talk about how that principle applies to a franchise.
Okay. So certainly one of the benefits to franchising and buying a franchise is you, in theory, have a more defined market when you go to sell. Your business brokers that are familiar with that industry. Let's use a restaurant as an example. We'll look at it and say, you're an established brand. You're running a unit or units in an established brand, and your EBITDA is X dollars. You can reasonably expect to sell your restaurant or restaurants at some multiple of X. And it's a range, of course, depending on a lot of different factors. One of them is if you have multiple units, the multiple of X goes up a little bit for each unit.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more of a metric out there. And it may be easier to sell than some one-off business because it's easier for the buyer to understand. It seems fairly straightforward, and the training is there. Right? So if you're buying a restaurant and it's just a one-off and you know nothing about the restaurant industry, that you're depending on that seller who's never really trained someone to run the entire business operation, probably, to train you. If you're buying a franchise, the franchisor is going to train you, even though it's an existing operation.
Yeah.
So there's some real value to that. Also, there's a level of support that you should expect, and most of the times will get from the franchisor. So you're taking over an existing business. The franchisor wants to see that continues to be successful. It's in their financial best interest that your revenues be strong, that your operation be strong. So if you run into glitches or problems, hopefully these are things that other franchisees have experienced, and you can call on the franchisor and say, hey, I'm having this problem. And they go, oh, yeah, here's what you should do. I have also had clients who benefited from being in a franchise system where the franchisor wasn't able to help them, but they just got on the phone and called. I had one client that called over 100 of his fellow franchisees in a system. This is during the depths of the Great Recession. Mm. He was really struggling in his business. Mm-hmm. And he literally called every other unit in the system. Not all of them would take his call, but many did. And he came up with a strategy and a plan to solve the problem. It was a gamble, but he took it, and it was successful. Mm. And eventually he got up to 5 units in that system. So it worked. And so having that ability to call on others, if you were running a massage studio that was independently owned, there might be other people you could figure out to call, but you'd have to figure it out. There's not a list out there with
That's right.
a bunch of phone numbers and email addresses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's the FDD itself and the transferability of that franchise, right? This is where you need Michael Rosenthal to look over that FDD for you, right? So that you actually have, you're building a business that the franchisor is not going to give you a hard time about selling, or you've got that ability to transfer that franchise to another buyer.
Yes. Now, in theory, the franchisor typically has the right to reject your buyer if they don't think they're qualified. And it's there in paper. It's in the franchise agreement, but it's really rare that I've seen a deal get turned down. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, in most situations, if a franchisor is going to turn down a buyer that you bring to them, you need to be thinking about why, particularly if you're taking back a note from some portion of the purchase price.
Right.
That person needs to succeed for you to get the last dollar out of your business.
Yeah, and in those cases, the franchisor is really, you're sitting on the same side of the table as they are. They want that buyer to be successful.
Correct.
Yeah, and if they've got reservations, it may be worth listening to.
And from the franchisor's perspective, you're a known commodity, right?
Yeah.
To use the football analogy, you're a starter. Right?
Yeah.
You've been playing. They've watched you. You're a veteran, and now you broke your arm, and you can't play, and you're bringing in somebody else who might be better than you, right? But they might not. Right? And so they want to have the opportunity to look at that, and hopefully they have the experience to get a sense of what works. A lot of this is just basic common sense. Does somebody have a business background? Do they have the capital that's necessary? And on a rare occasion, do they have the personality to make this work? Some people, I always give the example of, I've got 2 adult daughters. One is a business owner and one is not. And they're very different. They're both wicked smart. Yeah. But they are very different in their approach to the world. Mm-hmm. If you are selling a franchise, and the franchisor wants someone, he wants daughter number 1 who wants to be a business owner and has told me that she'll never work for another human being again in her life.
She's been there, done that, and moving on.
She started her own business at 24.
Wow.
She didn't like working for somebody else.
Wow. One of the things that we talked a lot about before we came on the air is just when it comes to running the business, and then when it comes to exiting the business, just the importance of good books and records.
Yeah, I can't understate the critical nature of that. So in a franchise system, typically they're going to require you to keep your books in a certain way. Some systems require that you use their designated outside accounting firm. Mm-hmm. Most don't, but you have to send your monthly profit and loss statements, balance sheet to the franchisor. Hopefully somebody's keeping an eye on that in the interest in trying to help you be successful. So you're going to have good books. As in a lot of small businesses, people don't know how to keep books, and they may not get the help they need getting things set up and understanding what they need to do. But when you go to sell the business, not having good books is a huge handicap. I always think back to one of the first transactions I handled as a young lawyer. Was a friend of my parents who had a restaurant, and it was a couple, and they were selling it. And look, this was back in the days when restaurants, most of the payments were cash. And so we're having a conversation with the buyer, and the buyer says, we're only making a very modest amount in this business. And my client, the wife, looks at this buyer and winks at him and says, and the buyer quite rightly looked at her and said, no, I don't. I don't really know. So having clean books is important. Also, many small business owners try to take as much advantage of our tax system as they can, and they run a lot of expenses through their business that...
Oh, come on. I'm shocked to hear that.
Yeah, I know. It's rare. And I always say that's between you, the IRS, and God. But when you're going to sell the business, people are going to look back at least 2 or 3 years and say, what's the business really make? And they don't want to have to sort out your sports tickets and the trips to the meetings in Las Vegas and so on. Yeah. They want to see a clean set of books. And franchisors are going to typically want to see that too. So it runs in parallel.
Yeah. Michael Rosenthal is with us, folks. He's with the Clark Hill Law Firm. He has been a member of XPX now since inception, for the 5+ years that the organization has been around. And I'd like to switch gears in that direction, if you don't mind, Michael, and just talk about what attracted you to XPX to begin with. New organization, and what attracted you, and what have you seen in the growth of the chapter?
What attracted me, and I remember the meeting where 3 of the founders sat me down over a cup of coffee and said, here's what we're trying to do. And I just thought, wow, why hasn't somebody done this before? Just the notion of putting together a group of professionals that have lots of different skill sets that can help clients like mine build their businesses and find the right exit. And really, I just thought this is a great opportunity to educate myself and my clients, and then to introduce them to people that have the right skill set to help them maximize the value of their business. And quite honestly, what I've seen is entrepreneurs frequently make the same mistakes over and over again. And I don't just mean that an entrepreneur repeats the same mistakes. Most entrepreneurs make the same types of mistakes when it comes to dealing with their business as they get to a successful stage later in life. And I think there's tremendous value in XPX because we're just trying to get out there and educate people, right, and show them how to get the most out of their business. And that it doesn't just help the business owners. It helps the employees who sometimes benefit from the success of the business, the continuity that comes with that, right? Knowing that the business isn't going to be run until dad reaches his 70s and has a health problem and has to shut the business down, and you got a bunch of people out of work. It's an opportunity to really do things in a way that makes sense. And hopefully it helps entrepreneurs think about things that they're probably thinking about, but they probably are pushing those thoughts into the corner of their brain because they don't really want to work on it.
Talk about why you advocated that your firm be a sponsor and what that has done for you.
My firm, I think my old firm has been a sponsor since inception. Yeah. And I believe in the organization, so therefore somebody has to sponsor it, right? That every organization requires some level of funding in order to make it work. And so I think sometimes you have to put your money where your mouth is. And I appreciate the fact that my firm has always been willing to do that. In terms of value, I think what it's done is it's done 2 things probably. One is it's just an opportunity to get our name as a firm into the business community here in Atlanta. And I think the other thing is I've certainly met people within the organization over the years. Some of it has resulted in referrals of work, but also, and probably more importantly, I've got a cadre of people that I trust that I can call upon for my clients. Yeah. My oldest client, and by that longest standing, is privately owned company. It's owned by a gentleman in his early 70s. And probably a year and a half ago, we were having a conversation. I know his family. I know a lot about him. And it's, what's your plan? That's the conversation. What's your plan? And the response was something along the lines of, I don't need to have a plan. I love what I do. I have nothing else that I want to do with my time other than occasionally be around my grandchildren and my kids. And I'm just going to keep doing this. What's going to happen if you have a health issue? So I was able to introduce him to someone within the organization who helps people do exit planning. And it was just sit down and have a talk. And what I heard back was that my client's number one key employee is sitting there, and she's in her early 60s, and she said, "You never asked me." But I'm not going to do this forever, right? And what was reported back to me was a look of shock on his face, because she didn't share the same "I'm going to die with my boots on" mentality. Now they're working on a plan. And so I think that's incredibly helpful. And I don't know that I could have done that on my own. I think it required a different skill set than what I have as a lawyer. And that's really valuable. Sometimes it's as simple as, hey, I need to get an appraisal, right? Well, I know I've got a person. Do you know somebody that can help me with this or that? It's just been very valuable in that respect. And I, as an advisor, really value having a group of people. If somebody calls me with a problem, if I'm not the solution, which I'm usually not, I want to have a solution that I can suggest to them.
One of the things that strikes me about XPX and maybe the way some people look at joining organizations is they look at it as, well, this is my referral network. It's more than that. It seems to me like what we had Scott Ward on this show a few months ago, and one of the points Scott made was, I get to be, because I'm involved with XPX, I get to hear a lot of different professionals from a lot of different disciplines that help me get just conversant enough to be able to better serve my clients and know, therefore, whether I'm making a good referral to in a particular discipline, not just the person, but the discipline that maybe you need to bring to the table. And it strikes me that the XPX, given the way all the meetings are set up, the education, the way that comes to the surface for people, it strikes me that XPX does a great job at that.
I think it does an outstanding job. And there's two features. One is educational. I'm learning more about what you do, and therefore there's that little nugget hopefully I can use at some point. But also, and now I'm going to sound old school, I'm building a better Rolodex.
Yeah.
So what is it? Now we say we have a better Outlook contacts or better LinkedIn profile. But I've got more people that I trust that I can refer clients to. And that's incredibly valuable. It's not just the upside of that. Quite frankly, there's nothing worse in my view than making a bad referral.
Yeah.
The client's going to blame me, and I have no control over the outcome once the words "call so-and-so" come out of my mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just that certainly it's that referral network, and Rolodex is part of my vocabulary as well, but it's certainly that, and it's certainly just making yourself a better professional in terms of just those day-to-day conversations with clients. When you can come out of a lunch and you think of that client that needs to hear a particular nugget of information that you heard, right? That you wouldn't have heard otherwise if you hadn't been at that XPX lunch.
Yes. I look at it as, I'm not just a technician. I'm an advisor.
Yeah.
And maybe what you want if you need surgery is the world's best surgeon. But maybe you also want someone who could tell you whether or not you really should have the surgery and what you should be doing before the surgery to get prepared for it.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. Michael Rosenthal, folks, with the Clark Hill Law Firm. Michael, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and share your expertise with us, and also thank you for your support of XPX Atlanta over the years.
Thank you for having me on the show. Enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. Before we let you go, though, we've got to get to the most important question, which is how folks can find you if they'd like to be in touch, be in contact with you. How can they do that?
The two easiest ways are email and phone. My email address is mrosenthal, MROSENTHAL at Clark Hill, CLARKHILL.com. And give you out my mobile number because all my clients just call my cell phone.
Okay.
It's 678-592-5346. Our offices are in Buckhead, but I would say that 90% of my clients, I'm happy to meet with people in person, but 90% of my clients, we interact electronically.
Sure.
It's fine.
Yeah, that's the rule of the day for certain. Michael Rosenthal with the Clark Hill Law Firm. Michael, thanks again.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, just a quick reminder that if you're unfamiliar with XPX Atlanta, here's what you really need to know. That XPX Atlanta is a collaborative group of industry professionals in a variety of disciplines that appreciate the value of relationships, collaboration with each other, and the important role that private companies in the heart of the middle market play in fueling our economies. They're interested in the success of those businesses. And they also understand the challenges that those companies face at every stage of the business cycle, particularly when it comes to exiting. If you are a professional advisor that works in exit planning and in some facet of that, or you're a company that you're interested in potentially exiting your business down the road, be in touch. Go to xpxatlanta.org. Check out the website, the various events and the offerings, and maybe consider becoming a member. I think you'll really get a lot of value out of it. So for my guest, Michael Rosenthal, I'm John Ray. Join us next time on the Exit Exchange.